Now, in order for Ionic to properly talk to your REST API, you're going to need to make HTTP requests in Ionic. Since Ionic contains AngularJS, you might think that the answer is simply to just use the $HTTP service, exactly as you did in the AngularJS chapter. However, there are some subtleties with Cordova that make using the $HTTP service in Ionic non-trivial. So to provide some context for why you need to think differently about the $HTTP service in Ionic, let's take a look at the index.html file that you learned about in the Ionic UI components lesson. In particular, look at how the index.html file loads app.js in a script tag. This app.js file is part of your Ionic application. It's not in any web server. So as it turns out, Cordova loads index.html using the file // protocol. So the index.html page and associated JavaScript has no origin. The reason for this is so your app can render without an internet connection. If you had to load Cordova and Ionic from a remote server while your phone was in airplane mode, you'd just see a blank screen. However, Cordova does enable you to violate the same origin policy. So your Ionic apps can make HTTP requests to any server using the $HTTP service. The Ionic CLI also makes it so that the Ionic Serve preview can make cross-origin HTTP requests. Now, if you've developed native mobile apps before, this shouldn't be surprising. There's no same origin policy for native mobile apps. They can make any HTTP requests to any server that they want. However, remember that your AngularJS services and controllers make HTTP requests to the REST API starting with /, which means that these HTTP requests happen against the local server. You need to make your services and controllers know that they need to make an HTTP request to a different origin. Now, thankfully, AngularJS makes this change easy. You won't have to change any of your directives or controllers. However, you're going to have to make a 4-line change to your REST API server and make use of a new AngularJS feature. Let's take a look at the AngularJS side first. So let's take a look at the controllers.js file from the sample app that you worked with in the Ionic UI components lesson. In particular, let's tweak the dashboard controller to make an HTTP request to your REST API for data about the books category. In Ionic Serve, with the code as is, you'll notice that you get no results from the server. And if you pull up your Chrome console and take a look at the Network tab, you'll notice that you get a 404 when you make this request to /API/v1/category/ID/books. This is because your Cordova mobile app isn't running on the same origin as your REST API anymore. So now how are you going to tweak this HTTP request in order to make it do a cross-origin request to your server, which will run on localhost :3000? Now, naively, you could just change the URL in this $HTTP call to start with localhost :3000. That would work given the proper server configuration. However, making this change would require changing all of your AngularJS code from the AngularJS chapter to attach this URL every time you use the $HTTP service. Thankfully, there's a better way using AngularJS HTTP interceptors. You haven't used this feature yet in this course. Interceptors are a very powerful feature, and in this lesson you'll learn just enough about them to solve the problem of converting HTTP requests to cross-origin requests. If you want to learn more about AngularJS interceptors, there's an excellent article in the video notes. So now your interceptor will be defined in your Ionic app.js file. At a high level, interceptors allow you to change the $HTTP service's behavior for your entire module. This .config file on an AngularJS module enables you to make configuration changes before this module is instantiated. In this case, you use this $HTTP provider and its interceptors array to add a new HTTP interceptor. So now, the fact that you're setting the request property on this HTTP interceptor means that this function will execute every time somebody uses the $HTTP service in this module. This function will enable you to transform all outgoing requests. So in this case, you're going to take the HTTP request, this rec variable, and if the URL starts with a /, you're going to prefix it with the URL http ://localhost :3000. This is to make sure that your Ionic app talks to the right server. But now, even with these changes, when you open up Ionic Serve --lab, you still get no data. What gives? Well, if you open up the Chrome Developer Console you'll see this no access control allow origin header message. This tells you that the server needs to send back this header in its HTTP response. Now this message is a browser security feature in modern browsers like Chrome that also affects Cordova-based hybrid mobile apps. Google Chrome will treat cross-origin HTTP requests that don't include an access control allow origin header in the response as an error, even if Google Chrome itself is configured to allow cross-origin requests. This is to make sure the server knows that it's sending a response cross-origin. So let's tweak the REST API server that you wrote in the REST API chapter to send back the correct headers. With Express middleware, this is pretty trivial. These lines of code are all you need to make Express satisfy Chrome's security requirements. This will tell Chrome that this server allows cross-origin requests from any origin. So once you save this, and once you reload, you should see that you got data back from the server successfully.